Welcome to this webinar, everyone. My name is Mike Murray. I'm Lookout's Vice President of Security Intelligence, and I wanted to thank you guys for coming bright and early on the West Coast to this webinar where we're going to talk about a really interesting threat actor. It's rare that you get to find a threat actor that's totally new out in the world, and so we're excited to share some details today. With me today are Michael Flossman from our team, who heads up Lookout's advisory services and professional services organization, and was one of the main threat hunters on this project, as well as Eva Galperin from EFF, who runs all things cybersecurity over at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And these two are going to take us through the story and the details around this particularly interesting threat actor, where they're from, what kind of things they're doing, what their activity looks like, and what you should do about it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael and Eva and let them get going.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and get this party started. Let's talk a little bit about what Dark Caracal is. What's particularly interesting about Dark Caracal is that they're a prolific and successful actor that's been operating with great success for several years now. We've observed them using tooling that targets Android, Windows, Linux, and OS X. And throughout the investigation into this actor, we've been able to attribute Dark Caracal to being run out of a building belonging to the General Directorate of General Security, the GDGS, in Beirut, Lebanon. What is particularly interesting about Dark Caracal is the sheer scale of the attack, the fact that they have mostly moved to mobile tooling, and also that they've managed to get away with it for so long without getting caught. So here is where we have observed Dark Caracal victims. Notice it's most places. Victims have been identified in over 21 countries. This is only based on the data from one attacker's server. So the actual distribution of victims is likely very different, or much higher. We estimate that we've only managed to get about 20% of the fully available data on the CNCs. Victims have included government content, military personnel, medical professionals, academics, journalists, and civilians, sort of the equivalent of the espionage equivalent of bycatch. So what we did was we sort of followed the breadcrumbs left by Dark Caracal to downtown Beirut. The way that we did this was, here we go. We got it all the way down to the building. This was largely done through downloading all of the data, clustering all of the IPs and SSIDs that things were logging into, seeing that that there was a cluster that was logging into one particular SSID that indicated it was a sort of testing area. These were all phones with very little information actually on them. And so we looked to see where these SSIDs were coming from. At first, Google Maps told us that they were all coming from downtown Beirut. And you can see all the little blue dots that indicate sort of the very vague area where they were located. And then we sent people down to the ground to get a closer look, because Google Maps is not always accurate, and GPS is not always accurate, as anyone who has ever tried to maneuver in downtown of a city will know. And so we sent people, and we managed to get it down to a single building. So if you imagine the way that this conversation goes, so we found the building, and it's GDGS. How do you know it's GDGS? Can you be absolutely certain? Well, It says GDGS in big letters across the top, and it's the tallest building for many blocks around, so I'm going to go with yes. We had other people come to Beirut and confirm our findings on the ground before we published the report. It is most definitely this building. Now this SSID is shut down with the publication of this report, surely indicating that GDGS is entirely innocent.
Yeah, so digging into Dark Caracal's past, we found that these guys have been conducting a really long-running intelligence gathering operation, and it was really surprising to see that they've been operating at least 6 years ago. So we're talking back in January 2012 is when things kicked off for them. So since then, they've been busy testing out premium mobile surveillanceware tools such as FinFisher, improving their own capability, and in that we actually saw them develop their own mobile surveillanceware tool, which we'll go into a little bit. And then also they deployed desktop malware in conjunction with all these operations, as well as registered the domains and set up the infrastructure behind this to support their operations. So one of the things we noticed throughout this investigation was that earlier on, Dark Caracal's tactics relied primarily upon a desktop capability. And something that stood out to us was that we observed them transition to focus and prioritize mobile. So what was so special about their mobile capability that allowed them to net over 80 gigabytes of data from victim devices, you might ask? Well, let's take a look under the hood of Palace. That's their mobile surveillanceware tool, and see what it's actually capable of doing. So Dark Caracal and their tooling, it's all about gathering intelligence from their victims, and the capabilities of their mobile component, known as Palace, really highlight this. So unlike financially motivated actors, the goal here is all about information. So Palace is capable of silently pulling back a range of personal and corporate information or sensitive information on a device. So if Palace is on your mobile device, Dark Caracal would be able to basically retrieve all your text messages, track wherever you go, record your calls, take photos with your camera, and silently record surrounding audio without a victim being aware of this. Among other capabilities, Palace can also scan nearby Wi-Fi access points and exfiltrate this data. While that's useful for an attacker, it also played I guess a pivotal role for us in actually being able to pinpoint where Dark Caracal was administrating their tooling from, which Eva mentioned we managed to track down to a specific building in downtown Beirut. So if you'd like to know more about how we actually did that and the details around that process, I'd recommend checking out the report by Lookout and EFF on Dark Caracal. One of the things you might notice missing on this list is a complete lack of any references to 0 days. We haven't left it out. It's simply because Dark Caracal wasn't found to make use of any of these. In fact, in terms of sophistication, many of these capabilities aren't unique to Palace. The code for most, if not all, of these capabilities can be found on various coding sites. We'll see this later in the webinar, but despite sitting towards the lower end of the sophistication spectrum, Dark Caracal was highly effective with significantly less investment than other actors that we've seen researching and purchasing their own exploits. So Dark Caracal definitely isn't the only actor profiting from this low sophistication approach. Over the last couple of years, we've seen a number of unrelated threat actors deploying custom mobile surveillanceware and adopting a similar approach that relies heavily on social engineering. So in order to compromise the target devices or the devices of targets, Dark Caracal has been observed sending crafted WhatsApp or Facebook group messages in an attempt to direct targets to a watering hole. So on the watering hole, victims will find a number of popular messaging applications such as WhatsApp, Plus Messenger, Signal, Telegram, and a number of other ones. And if a target's unfortunate enough or is tricked into installing these apps, all of these have been modified to include the Palace malware. So at that point, Dark Caracal is basically able to perform any of those capabilities that I just went through. So they have a considerable amount of control over a target device. Yeah, and can pretty much pull back an entire person's personal life, as well as any corporate information that might be on that device. So to visualize this out, what we saw is that Dark Caracal was frequently seen to actually deploy social engineering messages via WhatsApp, which directed targets to the watering hole server secureandroid.info. So this was a fake app store that served a number of those Trojanized Android applications. Then on the side, they had a number of Facebook groups where crafted content was posted to direct targets to either a phishing server that had been set up for credential harvesting of services like Twitter, Gmail, and a few others. And then there was also links directing targets to the watering hole server as well. So once again, the watering hole server, the fake app store contained all those sites, all those apps. And then supporting all of this was the adobe.net server. One of the other interesting things is that we believe physical access may have played a role in compromising target devices. And just going on to the next slide, we can kind of see this. On the right, we had a large amount of exfiltrated content, so data stolen from the devices of targets. And we found it interesting that one of the first messages taken from a compromised device that we can see on the right in orange, reads, "Hello, I got my phone back. Please use this number for text and phone. Thanks." And that kind of indicates that physical access played a role here. And you might be wondering how we're actually able to get an insight into all this exfiltrated content, and that was due to poor operational security by Dark Caracal in their infrastructure. So basically, all the data that they had taken from targets was publicly exposed, and we were able to use that access to not only attribute them, but also get a better insight into who it was they're actually going after. So during this investigation, we did a fair amount of analysis into their infrastructure. What we've graphed out here is the number of new files from compromised devices that have appeared on just one of Dark Caracal's servers. So we can see that as the year progressed in 2017, they're becoming increasingly active and acquiring on average more stolen data each day. You might also notice that there are distinct gaps in this, and that's due to them actually taking down their infrastructure and shifting hosting provider. So keep in mind, this is only one Dark Caracal server, but on it we found over 2 million text messages, 800 audio files, and several 100,000 images, as well as numerous social media and personal account information. So Dark Caracal has been able to set up a really sprawling infrastructure to support their operations, and they've primarily made use of bulletproof hosting providers. So these providers typically don't respond to takedown requests, and they allow their customers to host basically any content they like or run any operations without caring too much or interfering with those operations. So for Dark Caracal, they use the bulletproof provider Shinjiro and M247. And I guess for other researchers out there that are also looking at this infrastructure, there are a number of other shady characters operating in that IP range as well. So despite being difficult to take down due to their hosting provider, Dark Caracal servers, they ran a very specific set of services. And it was through this that we were able to have a lot of success in locating additional infrastructure that they ran. And we're able to achieve this by looking for this set of services, or essentially this fingerprint while scanning through IP blocks belonging to Shinjiro. As much of our analysis has been based on adobe.net, secureandroid.info, and tweetsfb.com. Like Eva said earlier, the actual number of victims, as well as the amount of data that has been taken from compromised mobile devices and desktops, is likely much higher than the figures we've reported on. So just quickly, the fingerprint we used and looked for throughout this investigation was based around Dark Caracal and their decision to favor Apache on Windows with MariaDB combined with certain versions of PHP, PHPMyAdmin, and OpenSSL. So it kind of feels like Dark Caracal either made use of an automated installation process, or perhaps they created a single server image running this fairly unique set of services and then reused that image across all of their infrastructure. So it made tracking their operations a lot easier than had they used a commodity or a kind of Linux, a LAMP stack or something that's more frequently used. So this really stood out to us. So earlier on, I mentioned that Dark Caracal made use of Facebook groups that were posting socially engineered content to readers to direct them to a watering hole. And here we can see that they were pretty good at cloning, cloning those sites. And we found a number of Bitly links as well in their watering hole that led us to these fake sites and resulted in the identification of additional infrastructure. Now, just quickly on the IPs, the phishing watering hole in VirusTotal, it showed us references to several recurring personas that continually popped up during this investigation. So these personas revolved around Op13 at mail.com, Hadi Mazay, Nancy Razouk, and Rami Jabor. And these identities continually appeared in WHOIS information for infrastructure, as well as certificate details of the desktop binaries that we discovered. And all of this led back, as we found, to Beirut. So the majority of the exfiltrated data that Dark Caracal's been able to acquire has been from Android devices. And like I said previously, it was very surprising for us. It was interesting to see that they'd focused previously on Windows, and in recent years they'd made a distinct shift to focus on Android, and that's quite clear to see in the split of data that they've been able to take from their victims. So from 81 gigabytes of data, we can see almost 60% is from Android devices. Dark Caracal isn't really unique in this. We've seen a lot of other actors, not just in the Middle East, but also throughout Europe, as well as Asia, make a similar shift. So basically expand their tool sets and their capabilities from being desktop to actually having a complemented mobile capability that more often than not is what they focus on. So just a bit more background about how we actually identified this. And yeah, I don't know, Eva, I guess you could give us some more background about OpManel and how we made the connection, I guess, to this current campaign and operation.
Sure. So a couple of years ago, EFF took on a case. We were representing an online newspaper called Respublika. They're essentially the only independent newspaper covering Kazakhstan. They used to be based out of Kazakhstan. Now the publishers live outside of Kazakhstan for reasons that will soon become obvious. They were being sued by the government in the state of New York, because that is where Respublica's servers were located, which is how they came to need American lawyers. And shortly after we came to represent them, we became aware that they were receiving very suspicious phishing emails. So since EFF has some reversing capability, we went ahead and we took a look at the emails. We took a look at the various attachments, the weird PDFs, and we discovered this, the operation manual infrastructure. At the time, we attributed this campaign to an Indian company called Appin, or sort of infamous hackers for hire, and are extremely noisy because that's sort of the nature of hacking for hire. It turns out that this was a mix-up that came largely from the use of many of the same bulletproof hosting providers. But we went ahead and we published a report. And as part of the report, we mentioned that on one of the CNCs, we had found evidence that there was an Android implant, but we were not able to find the software itself. So after we published this report, Lookout took a look at it.
Yeah, so it was at that point that we're able to make use of the IOCs that the EFF had released and actually leverage them to discover the Palace malware family. And I guess interestingly, it's worth pointing that during this process, we also identified the use of FinFisher. So this actor had in the past quite likely either been using a demo version of FinFisher that we haven't found anywhere else in the wild, and either for demo purposes or trialing it out. But despite having access to that sort of premium capability, we then saw them shift to actually writing their own and developing their own in-house tooling. In terms of what they're actually able to take, it's a range of, obviously we haven't dug through this in extensive detail due to the amount of data that was actually taken. Our focus was more on the capabilities of the mobile component as well as the desktop component, as well as attribution. But what we did identify in terms of what they'd taken was a lot of sensitive information. So on the desktop side of things, we saw banking and financial details, legal information, as well as two-factor authentication codes on mobile, recordings, and a fair amount of sensitive information across the board.
On the desktop side, we found Dark Caracal to be using Banduke, and also discovered a new malware family known as Crossrat that is in development, has been written for Windows, OS 10, and Linux. For details on both these families, the mobile side, Dark Caracal's infrastructure, and a comprehensive list of IOCs that can be used by your organization's SOC and incorporated into your existing corporate tooling. The complete report contains all of this information and much more. So what should organizations do? Well, to begin with, the IOCs are available in our report. For concerns about protecting your desktops, these are the things you'll want to check. For mobile IOCs, they're also there, and please reach out to us if you would like more information. We have, Lookout has visibility into mobile endpoints. EFF does not. It would be awkward if we did. This is only a high-level overview of this threat, so for a more detailed understanding of this actor, please read the joint EFF and Lookout report. EFF's report on Operation Manual as well for more information, and also for more information about that campaign in Kazakhstan. The key takeaways here are beware of mobile APTs. APT threat actors are evolving to target mobile devices, and it's often mobile first now. In fact, you can really see the way in which this particular actor shifted from desktop to mobile over a period of about 3 years. This is not the first APT actor on mobile. For example, XRAT has been there for years. This is one of the first globally active APTs that we have seen. And keep in mind that they do have Western targets. So we're talking about the USA, we're talking about Canada, we're talking about Europe. So these are people who could actually be your customers. And finally, we take questions.
All right, thank you guys for that incredible overview of this particularly interesting threat. We'll open it up to questions. As you, I think, all know, you can raise your hand or type into the question box in the GoToWebinar control panel on your screen. You should be able to ask whatever questions you need to. And we're just letting a couple of questions pile up here for a second. So, first question came in. You folks talked a lot about the Android version of Dark Caracal. What do we know about iOS?
Yeah, I can take this one. So far throughout this investigation, we haven't identified that Dark Caracal's using any sort of iOS capability. We believe that's quite likely due to both their technical sophistication, but also with where their targets likely geographically reside and what sort of operating systems they'll be using. So we believe that they're primarily targeting groups that make use of Android, regions of the world that are Android heavy, and as a result, they haven't had a need to actually focus on writing an iOS capability at all. That's definitely not something we'd rule out seeing down the line, but so far it hasn't come up.
Awesome. Okay, next question. Does prevention of sideloading apps help mitigate the risk, that i.e. only allowing app loading from Google Play?
Yeah, it definitely does. So in that case, that would have prevented, victims wouldn't have been able to actually install those. So in terms of security best practice, definitely something to do there. It doesn't, like we've seen in the past, that malware does occasionally make its way into the App Store. So while it is definitely best practice to do that, it doesn't guarantee that you won't come across some sort of threat on the Play Store. And to give a bit more context into that, last year we reported on a surveillanceware tool that was being used against the Israeli Defense Force, and they were using a very similar approach to Dark Caracal, in that they were socially engineering targets into it, installing apps from their own infrastructure. But what we saw in late 2017 is that they actually shifted to hosting these in Google Play, and that was to add legitimacy to I guess these social engineering messages. So even if users had only allow installs from trusted sources or official sites, they could still be compromised. So yeah, I guess users just need to be aware on many different levels of how they can be taken advantage of by the different threat actors that are breaking into this space.
This is a mitigation I would describe as necessary but not sufficient.
All right, next question. And I think we kind of went over this already, but I'd like to actually just have you guys hit on this again. How did you guys come across the indicators of this APT? I think it's worth saying again how we found this, because it's kind of an exciting story.
All right, so EFF publishes the op manual report. One of the things that we found on the CNC that we were investigating was a bunch of admin panels. The CNC was left wide open. We saw an indication that there was an Android implant, but we were not able to find the implant itself. And so our report simply said, somewhere out there, we're pretty sure there's an Android implant. Here are all our IOCs.
Yeah, so we pretty much took that information. I mean, the fact that the EFF had mentioned that there was a nation-state actor at play here that had a mobile component was definitely something that we're interested in tracking down and identifying. So it was from those ISCs that the EFF released that really kickstarted our investigation and discovery of the mobile component. And I guess just looking at our own data set, our analysis of the Palace malware was basically flagged as high risk. So at some point down the line, it is quite likely that this is a threat that we would have started researching at some point. But those ISCs definitely helped at the start and helped flag this family to our research team.
All right, I got a couple of funny ones that we can end on. The first one is a comment that says, "You guys are awesome."
All right.
The second one, and this one's directed at Eva. Big fan of Eva. Love her work.
Aw.
So we completely agree. We've really loved partnering with the EFF on this work, and we've really loved collaborating. And the ability. It's one of the best things about the security industry is all the collaboration with cool people. And I consider all the people who came, part of that collaboration. Thank you guys all for dropping in this morning and listening to us. I hope that many people have listened to this online because we're recording this and we'll put it on our website. Thanks again to our two speakers this morning. And thank you all for attending. Hopefully you attend another one of these in the future, and hopefully we provided some entertainment, some education this morning. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks.